A Robot Called Zip, written and illustrated by Harry Tour. It was the spring of the year 2318, and the latest batch of common bots were coming off the production line. These robots were amazing, and took a whole 9 months to complete. Each robot was built to make it in the outside world, and each robot was given an instruction book filled with simple rules to stay working well. These rules for living well were based on years of research and experience from the brightest robot scientists of the time. One little blue robot opened his eyes a little earlier than the rest. The first thing he saw was the row of robots standing in front of him. What were these strange-looking things? The little blue bot soon realized he was very much like the other robots, but with a closer look it seemed that each robot was a little different and special in some way. The quiet little bot wondered what special differences he had. This bot's name was Zip. And Zip was definitely curious. As the bots were heading to the classroom to learn about how to make it in the outside world, a tiny creature fluttered by and caught Zip's eye. It had colorful wings and seemed to dance through the air. Zip was mesmerized. Once in the classroom, Zip was still so fascinated by the little creature that it kept fluttering through his mind. Was it another type of robot? Something else, perhaps? How did it float through the air? Zip had so many questions. When his attention finally came back to the classroom, the lesson was over. It was now time for the robots to be released from the factory and sent out into the world. On the first night in the city, Zip ended up miles from the factory. It was cold and dark, and Zip was homesick. Zip also worried he wouldn't be able to look after himself properly because he hadn't paid attention in class. Zip picked up the little book from the factory and began to read. The rules inside were very simple, but Zip wondered if it would be enough to help him. Whatever the case, Zip took comfort in the book because it reminded him of home. The next day, Zip awoke to a much warmer world. The light from the sun rising and the faint knocking sound in Zip's head slowly woke him up. Zip noticed his fuel level was low, so the little bot decided to go looking for breakfast. Zip moved about the city. He noticed many of the other robots stood very differently than him, and didn't seem to roll like he rolled. Where did they learn to stand and move in such strange ways? Zip wondered if he should learn from them. But Zip remembered the book that taught more balanced ways to stand and move, which would be easier on his parts. Were these other bots damaging their parts? When Zip arrived at the fuel station, he began filling up on the regular fuel mentioned in his book. Almost right away, Zip felt much better than before. He noticed the other bots filling up on different kinds of fuel. The other fuel pumps had bright signs with words like super and power, which sounded like good things. Some were thick and syrupy, and some were really dark, and one even had colored marshmallows. Zip wondered if he was choosing the right fuel, but then he noticed these other bots didn't seem to be feeling so well. With his fuel tanks full, Zip thought it was a good time to go to the park to get his regular daily movement. Zip noticed that many bots were sitting and laying about while connected to little devices. Zip was very curious about these little devices, for they looked like a lot of fun and the other bots seemed very focused on them. Zip also noticed that some of these bots looked like they hadn't moved for days. He wondered if they knew that their parts would slowly stiffen up. By the end of the day, Zip felt great, but he was becoming just a little bit tired. He remembered his book said every robot should get at least 8 hours of battery charging every night. Zip found the nearest charging station and plugged in. He was shocked to see how empty the station was. Where was everybody else? Zip couldn't help but think he was missing out on something fun, but he was tired, so he powered down and went to sleep. As the days passed, Zip became a little more comfortable with life in the city, even though he felt unsure if he was doing everything right. Then, one day, an alarm inside Zip's head went off, and his antenna light flashed red. It was time for Zip's first checkup back at the factory. Zip hopped aboard a train to go back to the factory. Once the train doors closed, Zip's thoughts turned inward. He was very excited to go home, but worried that he may have done some things wrong. Time raced by, and before long, Zip was back at the factory. Zip was so full of questions, but before being able to ask any of them, the engineers ran their tests, and they were amazed at what they found. They asked, "How have you kept yourself in such great condition?" Zip was equally amazed and replied, "I just followed the bot book. but I noticed most of the other bots in the city were doing things so differently than me. The engineer replied, "Well, most of our bots come back to the first checkup in rough shape." Zip asked, "Is it okay to ask you a few questions now?" "Ask away," said the engineer. After 2 hours of Zip's questions, the engineer finally said, "Well, we do have some answers for you, but as much as we think we know, there's so much more out there that we don't know." Zip thought back to when he was first built and how difficult it was to focus in class, and now all he wanted to do was study more. Zip left the factory feeling good about himself and happy that his checkup went well, but he still had so many questions. Later that year, to find the answers to his questions, Zip decided to go back to school. Zip learned more and started doing his own research to help bots live better. This time, Zip paid much more attention in school, but every once in a while, Zip's curiosity still took him away. Why do some of the robots move and stand so differently? Why do you think it's important to choose the right fuel? Why do you think the robots should be active every day? Why is it important for the robots to recharge their batteries? What things can you do in your life to keep you happy and healthy?